I like it. Are we on?
We on.
There we go.
There we are. What's up, man?
That's
How
all.
you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. It's we just finished up a good breakfast at home, and everybody's full. Yeah, we're doing good.
I'll say so. Listen, I just want to share with the audience. This brother lives up in Canada. He's like me and the rest of you, only he's up there. No other difference, and we're gonna find that out today. So you're doing good, brother.
Absolutely, absolutely. We got my belly's full, and I'm not shook, so we're good.
Eat, eat.
How are you doing down there?
Oh man, some wind is coming through, man. It's getting cold.
Yeah.
Getting
Sorry
cold.
about that. Sorry about that. We sent some down for you. We got to get rid
So
of.
listen, so does that weather pattern, that cold up there, it pushes down.
Absolutely.
How is that done?
Yeah, listen, I don't know, man. It's you know what the funny thing about it is if you watch the weather patterns, like I grew up in the Toronto area, right, and that's not far from like Detroit and Chicago and them places, and so all these places they call windy cities, right?
Right.
Um, that's because you get northern air coming directly from the North Pole all the way down, and that's coming up from the Gulf Coast. So that's where you get all those tornadoes, Tornado Alley, right? And Toronto's the end of that Tornado Alley area.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, and that's why it's just strong winds from the north and strong winds from the south coming together, and that's where you get that. Yeah.
So, you know what I wanted to explain to the audience, and you're gonna beautifully help do that,
Mm.
is we have the history here in the United States,
Yeah.
because of course, because we were born and raised here. But
Mm.
you have it up there in Canada.
That's right. Yeah.
It's Do the people up there in Canada, do they look at themselves as Canadians or Americans? And when I say Americans, I mean the whole continent of America.
Oh no, it's funny because when Canadians go abroad, right? If you go to Europe, if you go to Africa or whatever, they often we're often mistaken for Americans as well. But definitely up here, everybody would call themselves Canadians. So
Okay. Yeah, because I was wondering, and the main reason I asked that, because you have a huge Caribbean population up there.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And I'm like, why is that?
There's a lot of because there's a lot of connections, and historically, uh, so there's a lot of connections between us and the Caribbean. A lot of us. Let's start at the beginning. So my people are from the East Coast. Okay, we are Lung or El Nu or whatever you want to call us. Traditionally, that's what we used to call ourselves as El Nu or Lung, and our people were many of them were stolen and brought to the Caribbean. And most people don't understand this. They don't know this. Like even if you go back, the some of the first imperialists to come over from Europe, right, were the Portuguese. The Portuguese landed up in Newfoundland, okay, in 1500, okay, exactly that year, 1500 and
Let, let
15.
me let me ask you a question about that.
Yeah,
Newfoundland.
sure, sure,
Newfoundland.
yeah.
That's all it is.
That's all it is, man. That's all it is Newfoundland. That's exactly what they why they call it that. But in ancient times they used to call it Avalon. Like if you go back into ancient European history, if you go back into ancient English and ancient Gaelic history, they used to call it Avalon, and it was a mystical place. It's a place that they thought of it as being a magical, beautiful place that was advanced and all that. it's really interesting to go into that history. Today, even today, they have large parts in the eastern on the east coast of Newfoundland called Avalon to this day, because they knew Avalon to be this place. You know, a lot of the times, a lot of the legends of old, when they talk about these, you know, things like Atlantis, they talk about things like, you know, Avalon, they talk about all these different old so-called mythical places. They're real places, but they just happen to be in the Americas, right? And they happen to be known by different names. But yeah, what I was saying about that is, if you go back into, like I said, 1500, the Portuguese come over. Okay, a guy named Gaspare, and him and his two other brothers, they start the slave trade by taking the people called the Beothuk, right? Beotuc, or excuse me, Tuk, and they bring them down to most of them they bring back to Lisbon, right? Some of them they bring to Seville. They sell them off in those places, and then the last place they bring them down to is the islands down off the coast of West Africa. It's escaping me now, but the islands off the coast of West Africa there is, and they ended up populating those places. But they primarily sold them into slavery in Lisbon in Spain, and that's how that island got emptied of people. They didn't really do that in our territory because the French came over to our territory, and the French were the earliest Europeans to kind of come into the continent, and they ended up coming on into our area, which is Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, and the Gaspé, so that's part of Quebec, and that's what they call Acadia. And Acadia is just it's a French name for our territory, right? We call it Luntig. It's often called Micmacia, but originally it was our home, Luntig, and you know, we used to get along with the French at first, and then the British took over by kind of abducting us. A lot of our people got abducted during the early wars there. From the 1676 primarily is when they started abducting us and bringing us primarily over to Barbados is the primary island that they stole us away from, or stole us away and brought us to, rather, to live over there. But Barbados, Jamaica, so this is how we made all these connections, because a lot of us were stolen from our territory, brought down there, and then a lot of them wanted to return back.
Same exact story here.
Yeah.
But I want to get into some of the things that connect the United States and Canada, because here Canada is projected to us somewhere far off somewhere,
Mm.
and it's the same land mass,
Mm.
and it's the same land. It's just a border that separates them.
That's right.
And I want to get into this a little bit later about how you guys are trained up there to think of yourselves,
Mm.
and the similarities between here and there, because you know the distinction I was making earlier about the Caribbean people being up in Canada, that's a connection.
Right.
But we think we're different people because different colonizers came in and stamped their name on you.
That's
But
right.
you're the same people. I want to focus on those things before these Europeans came, like the mountain ranges,
Mm.
the waterways, the lakes, the rivers that flow in and out of each other, and because it's the same land, it's the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah, one nation. And it's so funny because it's like even as Algonquins, right? So I mean, this is the ethnic group, the language group, whatever you want to call it, right? Like when we talk about Algonquins, what are we talking about? We're talking about an ethnic group, okay, which is a little bit different than a race, but an ethnic group is basically saying that we all started off as one family, right? Before we branched off and became something different. And and if we bring up, and I don't know if you can do this, but if we bring up the Algonquin um, uh, map, like Algonquin people's maps, to find
Uh-huh.
that it is. You see, okay, you got the map of Canada up here, right?
Okay, I'm pulling it up now.
Okay, okay.
Go
Uh,
ahead.
but yeah, if you take a look at the map of Algonquin peoples, you see that that very much extends pretty much all the way across Canada, all the way across southern Canada, right? So from our territory in the east coast, the Lunds territory, all the way up to roughly Alberta, right? And then, but it also goes into into the United States, right? As far down as Virginia, right? Illinois was part of Algonquin territory. Um, Several of the other states around the Great Lakes, that whole region, that Great Lakes region, were all one. We're all one people. And now, if you talk to people about a lot of the official stories, anybody who's getting their official narrative from the government who the governments who took us over, who conquered us, well, they'll be like, no, 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 these are different people. And this is inaccurate. People talk about this, but it's like, and they always try and make it into different people. It's like, no, no, just like how you guys have states down there, you guys have separate states, right? But you're one United States, right? Same is
Right.
the same is true, for how we used to be as Algonquins, right? We were one united peoples under multiple in different regions, in different states or provinces or whatever you want to call it,
Right.
different regions. And so it was set up. And so your language changes. I mean, and we're experiencing the exact same thing here. As somebody from the South, you don't speak the same people as the same way as the people from the north. You have an accent, right, in
Right.
comparison to theirs, and vice versa. They have an accent to you, you have an accent to them. You don't say the exact same things, right?
Right.
Um, this is how it was, and we look at, like, even when you look into the histories, we see that even from the history from the European records, we see that even though they're coming from, let's say out of Quebec, talking to come over to our territory in the Maritimes, we can understand each other, right? And furthermore, that we are making deals and agreements and so on and so forth in ways that show that we're one people, right? But they always try and make you fight internally, and the way they make you fight internally is the same way they make you fight externally. Like when you go is as soldiers, you go to you go to war. They used to call the when they went to the Vietnam War, they used to call them the Charlie, right? They used to call the bad guys Charlie, or they used to call when they're in World War II, they called the bad guys the Japs, right? And the whole point of that was to kind of dehumanize them and say, okay, look, they're different from us. They're not real people. It's okay to kill them, kind of thing. Well, they used to do that thing internally too. They used to train us to see ourselves as different people when we're not different people. We used to all intermarry. We used to have all these different ceremonies where we go to find our wives in each other's territories and so on and so forth. Not maliciously, not aggressively, not at war with each other. In fact, we tried to outlaw wars internally between ourselves by creating different sports like football. Right, we were talking about that, yeah, the other day with the different, American football and Canadian football. Um, you know, this is an indigenous creation, right? We invented that, and we invented that to settle conflicts in a peaceful way.
Yeah, man. I noticed, the sports, of course, Canadian football and football down here. I
Mm.
just can't imagine watching football in sub-zero weather. Hey, man, we have a listener joining us. Jay, welcome to African Americans Ain't African.
Wait, Jay.
Yeah, I just caught you guys just now. I only got to the part where he was talking about the divisions, so I decided I'll just sit back and listen and learn.
Yeah, Jay is from New York,
Mm.
which is basically Canada. You know, can I say that?
What New York is 6 hour drive, right? So, most from Toronto anyway. Um, so most of our I mean, we have the same weather and all that kind of stuff for
Right.
sure. There's a lot of interconnection there. In fact, go ahead.
Um, so let's talk about the landscape up there.
Mm,
So I know it's mountains that the United States and Canada share.
mm,
Those Yukons and just Montana, all the parks and everything up there. They're shared by the same, by both. And see, I'm I'm tripping because I get caught up with that border thing. It's the
mm,
same place.
for sure.
It's the
Well,
same
I
place.
mean, even our territory, like there's the Appalachie mountain range, right? So that goes in on our side of the border. It's primarily into Quebec, okay, and it goes on your side of the border is Vermont, and then down south from there. I can't remember which states it runs through. I think it's I think Missouri's there. Is that what it is? Straight south of Vermont, then you get like New York is somewhere around there as well, right? But
Right.
these
You know what?
these
You
range.
know what? To be honest, I don't. I know very little about Canada, but
Mm,
I do know. Like you said earlier, Detroit. Detroit is real close to Canada,
yeah, yeah.
so
I mean,
it can to call it U.S. I mean, what is that? It's the same place.
for sure. Detroit has a very interesting history too. It started off as a French colony, right? But even, I mean, I say that, but it's like, I mean, really and truly, it was an indigenous colony before that. It was an indigenous city before that. The French ended up moving in to live amicably with the indigenous people of Detroit. It's actually a very interesting history. And then the British end up invading it, and then the Americans, the revolutionaries, whatever you want to call them, ended up invading that. And that's actually where uh, the song was the anthem, the national anthem. Bombs bursting in air, all that stuff. That was written about that battle, about that Detroit
Yeah,
battle, and so Detroit has this amazing history. People, we look at things, and the borders have constantly changed up until they kind of settled them, which was like around 1812, somewhere around there is when they settled the borders as they were. But before this, and still, as indigenous people, we have the right to pass over them back and forth as we wish, as we please, because they understood that they made these artificial borders, carving up our territory. But we have always had people who existed on both sides. Even today, like with our people as lone people, yeah, you know, some of our territory is in northern Maine, right? From New Brunswick. New Brunswick is one side, Maine is the other. But it's all the same land, and that's why it gets frustrating because we have stopped seeing ourselves for what we are. And that's one of the reasons why I was happy to talk and get connected with you on this topic is because we used to have a single country that went from north from the north all the way down to the south, where all the way down where you are. And when we go back throughout history, and I'm not just talking about when the Europeans got here, I'm talking about before the Europeans got here, we would be working together. We had our not only our trade routes, we had but same culture, same tradition. Like, it's even when they talk about the mound civilization, right? You're talking about the mound civilizations, and you talk about burial mounds. We're actually doing both. We're doing burial mounds all throughout. We do burial mounds as far north as my people are from, up in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Okay, and not only do we do burial mounds, but we always face our ancestors east towards the rising sun. Inside those burial mounds, we sit them up. We don't lay them down. We sit them up in a chair, and then we face them east. And so now, why is this relevant? Now, it's relevant because it shows that there's one culture, one consistent culture. The same is true about when it comes to the copper. The copper that you guys have down in the Southeast territories, they know it was taken from mines in the Great Lakes region, right? The same copper is used in our territory. So again, why is this relevant? It's relevant because we're showing consistency of a single culture. The copper culture is sometimes what it's called, right? If you look it up, you see the ancient copper culture of North America. Well, this is one people's, and they always try and create these artificial divisions. Divide and conquer. This is how you divide and conquer a people. We had a large population up here, despite what it looks like now. We no longer have a large population because primarily because of slave trade stuff that was going on. Like I said, they used to take our people, bring them primarily over to whatchamacallit, Barbados, and all the other ones, Bermuda, all these different northern islands. And the furthest I've ever heard of them going, transporting our people down into Jamaica specifically. Those ones became the Maroons because they were marooned in Jamaica. And then, of course, they came back in 1796 after they fought for their freedom and told the British, hey, listen, we're not staying here anymore. We want to go home. We want to go home. They transported our people from my territory up in Acadia, right? So Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, PEI rather, and brought them down to become Cajuns in Louisiana, right? So, we used to have large populations. Aside from that, what most people aren't aware of is the history of, and I wasn't aware of this until the last few years, but the history, when we talk about the history of North America, the place that you'll never hear about, that is probably the most important place when we're talking about North America anyway, not South America, but North America, is a place called Tadoussac. Tadoussac, Tadoussac, if I'm not mistaken. I'm off the top of my head, it's not the best, but if you Google it, you'll find what I'm talking about. And the history of Tadoussac is the history of when the French get into the game. And we tend to think of the French as being these friendly folk, and for the most part they were, or at least they acted that way. They acted that way at first glance. But for a long period of time, what they would do is they'd create friendship bonds with us, and then eventually they would sell us out. Okay, they did a good job of for years and years, making friendships, even intermarrying with our people, and then they would turn their backs on us, and when they would turn their backs on us, they would sell us into slavery, and then they would sell our people down south as slaves into you guys' territories, into the American territories. And so this is how we got underpopulated or depopulated. And the whole history of Canada, it's very funny because people have this weird impression that it's the opposite, that dark skinned people are moving into Canada, and it's like, no, they're constantly moving dark skinned people out of Canada, right? And there's all this nonsense about well, your skin gets lighter as you go further north and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, that's not how genetics works. I'm living proof of that. So is my grandmother. So is my great grandmother. I can trace my history all the way back, as far as we need to trace it, right? And they all look like me. In fact, most of them are actually darker than me. You see my grandfather, and my great grandfather. They're far darker than I am. So this whole concept of the light skinned people coming from the north and them coming from the south. Yes, of course you get dark in the sun. Everybody gets dark in the sun, but a lot of these notions are, a lot of these things that they teach us is just to confuse us and to create, conflict internally. And
Well, they do a good job of that here because
yeah,
it's embarrassing. I'm talking about college level.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
embarrassing. Oh, we got a question. What are Eskimos?
So Eskimos. So famously up here, we have three categories of indigenous people, or what they call First Nations people. So you got this, they'll say the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Okay. Now these are three different categories for a reason, right? First Nations people tend to primarily be Algonquin peoples, with the exception of some of the guys on the East Coast, excuse me, the West Coast rather. So BC and those areas, some of the Plains people, they're not Algonquin, but still First Nations people. Okay, and then you got Métis. Métis literally is a French word for mixed people. Okay, Métis, and it's an old French word for mixed people, mélange. Um, and then you got the Inuit, and the Inuit people are people from the north. So they're from the far north. Most Canadians, most people who live in Canada are living in the south, right? Or what we consider the south. But the Inuit people are the Eskimos, or what we used to call Eskimos. They consider it rude to call them Inuit or Eskimos today, because it means eaters of raw meat, and it's a word in their language. And when the Europeans came, that's what they like to call them, because they eat seals. So that's what they started calling them. But their actual name that they like to call themselves is Inuit people. They are a distinct group that isn't related to Algonquin peoples, and they are different Tartar people, right? So people who, like all the people of the Northern Circle, they're all the same bloodline. They're the same ethnic group. They're the same race of people.
What is Tartar line?
These guys are like if you look, so anthropologically speaking, Tartars are like an ethnic group that comes out of Russia, right? Out of like central Russia, and they just kind of spread across. They're nomadic people. They didn't. So we in the South, we built our houses. Okay, they call them wigwams. It's a house, and we got to get that nonsense out of the way, because a lot of the time they like to mix us up with that. Whereas these guys didn't really do that. They would build temporary structures and just keep moving along, right? Temporary structures, made out of igloos, and they live in those igloos, and they stay off of it. So that's like when you hear of the stereotype of Canadians living in igloos, that's where that's coming from, right? But that's not how the majority up here live or have ever lived. And those people are a very distinct group of people. They're different from the other First Nations groups. And what makes it so different is like there's literally no roads from where I am in the south. There is no roads that go there. You actually literally have to fly in order to see those people.
Yeah, so that's one thing I hear about Canada all the time is the vast wilderness up there.
Mm.
What's meant by that?
Yeah, but I mean, like the wilderness part starts kind of. So that's probably when you hear about. So there's provinces and then there's territories in Canada, right? There's three territories, and then there's 10 provinces, and the provinces are really where the majority of the people live. The territories are the parts where you're thinking of where there's no, you know, the vast wilderness side of things. Like most of us don't. Yeah. So like if you're looking at this map that you have up here, halfway through, halfway through Saskatchewan, halfway through Manitoba, halfway through Alberta and British Columbia is where you get that wilderness area. So the roads don't usually go up beyond that halfway point, right? So when we think of when most of us in the South think of the North, we're saying half of those provinces they're pretty much empty, right? I mean, you're going to get populations of 100 people in those regions. The territories themselves, so you got Northwest Territory, the Yukon, and Nunavut. They're all at the top, right? The three territories at the top, and those areas are just like I said, those areas you have to fly into. You can't drive, you can't walk, and a lot of it is because you know those the northern half of those provinces are all what's called muskeg. Okay, muskeg, which is bog or it's basically it's so wet. The soil is so wet that it's like quicksand. Okay, and you can't walk there. Wildlife when it goes into those regions, it ends like the you go to those areas and you don't really hear much wildlife unless it's like frogs or something like that because animals get stuck in it and then they sink and they die, right? That's how wet it is. So you can't even build in those areas, right? And it's interesting because it's like this is part of the whole, the ice caps melting and stuff. That's where you get that most affected places, but you can't build it. Like I've seen pictures of it where they where houses are sinking in because people tried to build one in the wintertime when it was frozen, and then in the summertime it thaws. The house will sink into the ground, right?
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So, but in the far north, you can build because it never thaws, because it's so cold up there that even in the summertime it doesn't really thaw out properly.
So the is that a province? None of it.
Yeah, none of it is one of the territories, and they're
So
called
what's up there?
territories.
So what's up there and north of that?
Well, north of that is the North Pole. Right, that's where Santa Claus is, and that's where Santa Claus comes from, man. That's the only thing that's up there.
Right.
And but yeah, north. So you get like most of these guys, even in none of it, right? They most of them live in one city up there, which is the capital city, Aliquip. Yeah, I think it's on that map. But yeah, there's only a few cities up there. I think the total is like 40,000 people in all the territories, if I'm not mistaken. Right? It's very sparse. That's the wilderness, but the very few people live up there, so it's like most like the other 40 million people are in the south.
So that's the population of Canada, 40 million.
40 million, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, actually 41 just recently, but yeah.
So your provinces are equivalent to our states.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, like the provinces are, yeah, because when you guys united, right? You get, your 13 colonies, right? And those 13 colonies became states, right? When we confederated, uh, we had four original um, colonies that became states, or excuse me, provinces rather. So, and then we added on the other ones after the fact. But that's the thing that makes things so interesting, because it's like the approach was a little bit different between how things were done in the United States versus how they were done in Canada. Um, we had a prime minister. The first prime minister is a guy named John A. Macdonald. John A. said, okay, he wanted to, instead of doing what you guys have been doing down there, or what the British had been doing down there, by trying to do it through war, he said he wanted to do it through peace, and said he wanted to sign treaties to to make agreements with Indigenous people as he went across, and made and so we have uh, so they refer to Indigenous people or First Nations people as treaty people, right? Because most of the time the agreement was, hey, listen, we are going to basically do whatever the hell we want in terms of managing things. You get to keep the land, but we're just managing the land, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's how it's done here too. So
Yeah.
I think one of the things, it's the same thing going on, but it's like in different languages.
Mm.
So you were talking earlier about how the French was up there.
Yeah.
So how's French in Detroit and Louisiana, all over? And to
Yeah.
me, it's just the takeover by all the countries over in Europe, the
Absolutely. Look, you know,
Portuguese, the Spanish, all that.
it's amazing to me, because it's like, you know history, the way we understand it, is not accurate. Okay,
Right,
versus the way we understand, the way we've been taught it. It's like, look. You've heard this old saying that, the devil mixes truth with lies. Okay,
right.
this is history. This is they are the devils, and they keep mixing the truth with the lie. So it's not like these things didn't happen. It just didn't happen quite the way that they explained them, right?
Right.
It's like, okay, let me give you an example. All right, my territory, right? Uh, the East Coast, Lumtig, right? New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, and the Gaspé. Okay, they call this Acadia. Okay, why do they call this Acadia? And what is Acadia? Well, Acadia is a place where a few hundred French people moved into the area. Okay, and there was, at least by their records, not by our records, but by their records, and their records are going to be underpopulated because they didn't even know about all the cities that were up there. Okay, when they came in, they didn't know the geography of the land, right? They didn't know anything about it. They just come in and then they start making estimates about how many people are up there. Okay, but by their estimates, there was roughly 35,000 of us. Okay, and I'm telling you, that's an underestimation.
You can
Now,
tell by the number they gave.
yeah, well, you can tell by a lot of things. They didn't even know about certain cities, like the interior cities of New Brunswick. They knew nothing about. So how are you going to be estimating when you haven't even gone to all the places? Okay, but anyway, nonetheless, this is their estimation. There's 35,000 of us. There's only a few hundred of them. In fact, the entire time of the colonial time, from 800 or 1800s down to the 1600s, when the French first came over. Okay, in that entire period, they only sent over 2,000 2,000 so-called colonists. Okay, 2,000. And that's for all of Quebec, right? You see that giant pink province there? All of Quebec,
Yes.
all the way down to Louisiana. Remember the Louisiana Purchase? Okay,
Yes.
there was only 2,000 people, 2,000 Frenchmen occupying that whole territory. Okay, all the way, including this territory in Quebec and including my territory over New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and PEI. 2,000. So, so, and then all of a sudden the population jumps. It jumps to like 60,000. So, okay, well, hold on a second. How come in a couple of years, a few years, first off, you only sent men over. So that's one thing about France. There was only a short period of time where they sent a few women over. Okay. And they sent a few women over because the Frenchmen were complaining, but also because they said, okay, look, we can't trust these guys to be having children with the natives and then think that those natives are going to be loyal to France. Right? So they
Right.
so they tried to send some of what they call the king's girls over, which are basically orphan girls. Okay. So anyway, but this was much later on that they sent them. So for the first roughly 100 years or so, these Frenchmen, these 2,000 Frenchmen, were only mixing with the Algonquin women. Okay, now, so so again, this is where we start getting to the concept of the Métis, right? The mixed bloods. Okay, but not everybody was a mixed blood. Case in point, right? So now we see their numbers change, and we see their numbers change, and what we see of them, we see, okay, um, the population of Acadia is 35,000, 60,000, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that the majority of those people are French? Is the majority of the blood in those people French?
No.
Obviously not. It doesn't make any sense. How can that be the case if you only sent over 2,000 people in that 200-year span period,
Right.
right? So then what is actually happening? Now in 1755, okay, midway through this, through this period of, the 1800s, as I mentioned, okay, 1755, the British end up taking over the French, okay, and then they don't like the French, so they kick out 55,000 of them, 55,000. Okay, remember only 2,000 French came over, 55,000 French are sent down to Louisiana and the surrounding areas. Okay, so who are those people? Are those French people? The
Right.
math doesn't add up. The math's not mathing, right? So again, this is how they tell the story, though. This is the story that they tell. This is the story that they tell us. This is the story that they tell you. This is the story that they tell the world. The story that they tell the world is, oh yeah, yeah, these were all French people, and the French, experienced this horrible, the so-called Great Expulsion is what they call it. If you want to look that up, it's called the Great Expulsion. But the math doesn't make any sense. Who are they expelling? Who are they sending into Louisiana? Who are the dark-skinned people who live in Louisiana today?
Right. Right. I
Right?
have a cousin. I have a cousin that lives in Louisiana, and she's changed her name to Africa. And
Mm,
I've been talking to her about things like this, the French. What was Louisiana called before it became Louisiana? Because that's the French king, blah, 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 blah. She know nothing about that.
mm.
All she knows is that she's African.
Yeah.
She
Well, I
even
mean,
got she even got Africa tattooed on her chest.
mm, I'm glad I didn't get to that that point. And you
Right.
know
All
what?
right.
The brainwashing is real, brother. The
Yeah.
brainwashing is real because the same thing happens up north with us. right? The same thing happens up north with us, and they push this Afrocentric nonsense. It's nonsense,
Eh,
nonsensical. I mean,
man,
you taught me that part, how nonsensical it was. But it's
and,
like,
and
go ahead.
and you know what? And what's cold about it, and what really pisses me off about it, don't even question it. Don't
Yeah,
even question it.
I mean, going back to it, it's like, okay, all right. So I mean, let's look at that for a second, right? We talk about, this concept of being African Canadian and African American. Okay, well, what does that even mean? It means supposedly you have this nonsensical story without any evidence, but anyway, I digress. That that 12 million Africans were sent across the Atlantic into the Americas. More specifically, we're talking about North America here, so let's keep it in context. Okay, and then you say, okay, well, it was actually only 4 million that came into North America. Oh, interesting. All right, so do we have any paperwork to, for all this cargo that is going across the Atlantic? No, we only have paperwork for 388,000 to actually have come across. That's only a small portion of that, and even that, um, is that paperwork accurate? Would be my question, because that paperwork, uh, is, first off, it's less than a quarter of what they actually say the actual population is. But aside from that, let's give it to them. Let's say that is the case for a second. That's just a quarter of it. But if we even examine that small quarter, that 388,000 that they have paperwork for, well, number one, uh, is that accurate information? Are we saying that this is fundamentally accurate? I would say definitely not. And I tell you why I say definitely not is because Virginia slave the Virginia slave law of, I believe, is 1678, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in there. You can look it up again, where it says that any, and basically going back to this history, and this is partially some of our people's history as well, because a lot of us migrated. There was a lot of movement going on back in the day, and nowadays we don't usually think of that movement. We think of people being stationary and not moving, which is far from the truth, especially once the Europeans came down. But
I don't,
we,
I don't, I don't, I don't think it's that. I think it's just because the people don't think at all. They just do what they're told to do. Simply, we like you said, it's only one route. You saying up there in northern Canada, shit, you can't even build a house.
yeah, yeah,
We never even fathomed that. We don't think of stuff like that. Most people only do what they're told. They
mm,
don't know how to think. They never see something and go, huh? What? Huh? No. They just do what they're told. And as long as we keep going on like it's okay, that's how it's supposed to be, you'll always end up here.
yeah.
It's not how do you say, can't you figure out how it happened? Don't you see something wrong in the story that they've told you your whole life? Don't you
I
see that it's not working? That what you've been taught isn't the way? I mean, what, 5, 6 years old kids ask that question,
mm.
and you have adults that just go along with it like it's cool? No,
I
man.
you know you know I and I think, I mean, that's what brainwashing is, though, right? Like, I think on the one hand, like, you're absolutely right. We need to ask questions. We definitely need to be doing that, especially as adults. But I also think that, it's, when it comes to brainwashing now, like, you accept the world for how it is. It takes a unique person to actually ask those questions of your reality, right? And I'm happy that you're always asking those questions, because most of us are not. This is critical thinking, right? This is critical thinking. They actually have classes at university, for critical thinking, right?
But
And
aren't we born with that trait? I
I
mean,
think
you
we
see
start off
babies do it all
that
the
way.
time.
You know what it is? It's the same. I always say, call it the Santa Claus phenomenon, right? You can tell a kid anything, right? You can tell a kid anything, and when you tell that child something, that child, oh yeah, big fat white guy comes and goes down the chimney, and and he just gives you gifts, and he does this all in one night, and kids believe it, right?
Nah,
And
nah, no. Listen, check it out. Here's my Santa Claus story.
yeah,
My mother used to do that Christmas stuff all the time. Just pimped it out. And it just didn't seem right to me.
mm,
We didn't have a chimney, but somehow we got gifts. This is me as a kid. I'm 7 years old. We can't keep going. Well, that's how it is. No, because we
yeah.
allow it to keep going.
I
Dang,
agree, but it's
it's
it's a lot
bullshit.
more because you're right. Eventually you probably get to that point where you start to question that. But I think, but there's two things about that. Number one, that's a pretty unbelievable story, and number two, it's you would believe it for a time. Most people believe it for a time. Okay, and this is what it is when you grow up, being taught nonsense, and it is complete nonsense once you actually look at the numbers, once you actually look at the data, once you actually sit down and ask these questions. And most of the people who are afrocentrics today, they're just not doing that. And I know because I used to do that, right? I used to think, oh yeah, you know what. And as I said to you before, my grandmother didn't teach me that we were African. I absorbed that from the culture. And I said, yes, we are indigenous, but in school they told me, oh, that people who look like us must come from Africa. And at school they told me that, or on TV they told me, or da 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 da, or this and that. They told me. So I'm gonna merge that into the truth that you're telling me, Grandma.
So
Right?
check this. And this is why I'm saying you better tell these kids the truth, man, because
Absolutely.
you, your kids are your replacement.
Mm-hmm.
You are your mom and dad's replacements. Your mom and dad are your grandmothers and it's a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about all this French, Portuguese, and British. What were the people, the indigenous people, doing? What was their spiritual ideologies? What was their ways of doing things? How did they see the mountains? Was it a
Mm-hmm.
way to travel? How did they see the rivers and waterways and lakes? What did they use them for? And we never hear those stories because we
Yeah.
never ask them. Because we're
Yeah.
taught that, oh, it's gonna be okay. Don't it? You gotta tell the truth, man. I mean, not saying that you are, you're sharing your experiences, but I'm saying, so on that Christmas story, what I was telling you about, I was like, forget this shit. I'm just gonna stay up and see if this motherfucker comes.
Yeah.
And he never came. So right then and there, you didn't have to tell me nothing. My mama didn't have to tell me nothing. I knew that it was bullshit.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
what the things we have to do, but we don't do them because, and this is a lot of is on us. Man, you got people in California
Absolutely.
today. You go by their house, they got cotton on their roofs to pretend like it's snow. They're teaching their children that. So the
Mm,
brain, like you say, is real,
yeah.
100% real. But I'm saying, don't we have aren't we born with something, some innate ability that we can see through a lot of this bullshit that we're fed?
I think some of us are and some of us aren't, and I'm happy that you're one of those ones that are. I think that's a certain characteristic that certain people have, and it's like and that's okay because it's like I think it builds up. You know, the problem is that is when you are confronted with that. Like when you were telling me, know, not in person, but through your videos and stuff like that. I said, okay, look, that no, the story that they're selling you is complete BS. Then I said, okay, let me challenge this because this brother's saying something that that I've never heard before. Okay. And this is where I do start following people, because you can't hear something and just go la 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 la, right?
Oh, you can't. Well, a
Right?
lot of us
No,
can.
but that's true ignorance. That's the definition of ignorance. When you hear somebody, right, but you choose to ignore what they're saying, you have ignored. You are ignorant, right? So this is where I fault people, because you are choosing. Ignorance is a choice, right? And it has to. You have to. We all have to. Each one of us. I do this every day. One of us has to look at ourselves and ask ourselves the question. First off, am I an ignorant person? Do I want to be an ignorant person? Right? And if you can do that, if you honestly say, no, I'm not ignorant, what that means is that you actually take in the things that you hear, and you sit down with them and you contemplate them by yourself, not to prove yourself right, right? In fact, what you should be trying to do is prove your assumptions wrong. That's what I did when I was listening to all these different, all these different people who were saying, yeah, no, this story they are telling us is BS. I said, okay, all right. Do I want to be do I want to walk through my life being ignorant, or do I want to actually know the truth? Because most people don't want to know the truth. They don't want to know the truth. They want to sit in their ignorance, because ignorance is bliss. Because ignorance means I don't have to do anything. I don't have to fight. I don't have to stand up for myself and for my children. I don't have to get along with people. And it is work to get along with people, because everybody's different. Last one of us is different. So in order for us to work together, we have to work through our differences. But the only way to do that is to see the commonality, to see my brother in myself, right? I see you and me. I see us and each other. I see all the commonalities, and this is what our ancestors were great at. Our ancestors were great at this, right? Our ancestors, they said, okay, yeah, you know what? We used to kill each other, and instead of killing each other, we're gonna find a way to have competition, and we're gonna make it healthy, and we're gonna be running and having fun and enjoying ourselves. That's how they invented the different sports, whether that be hockey, whether it be football, whether it be all these different things that we invented. And say, okay, yeah, you know what? You got a little bit of this. I need a little bit of that, right? You guys. So just as an example, your people brought up the corn to our people. We didn't grow corn up here. That's something that we imported from you guys, right? We gave you our metal. We gave you our copper. That's something we sent down south, right? So this exchange is a back and forth, right? And then we exchange the ideas, and we exchange the different the gifts. We have the sweet grass, right? Like there's the guys in the central, they have the tobacco, right? And all these different things do different, they're all different medicines. That's why we call them medicines. And once we start going through this, like you were mentioning about the waterways, right? These are another major commonality that we don't know anything. We got to look at the ancient infrastructure of our territory, because the whole area, the one nation, the beloved lands, we have one infrastructure, we have one way of doing things. We were using the waterways as transportation. That's why we're not using horses. That's why they said, oh, we didn't have the horses. No, it's not that we didn't have horses, it's that we didn't use horses. We didn't use horses because we used the waterways, because you can go from all the way down in the south, straight up the Mississippi into the Great Lakes region. And it used to be that there used to be a connection between the Mississippi all the way into the Great Lakes. And then from the Great Lakes, you go all the way across the St. Lawrence up into my territory. And you can get into all our waterways and get to our cities. And we used to actually have water canals, right? And we see them, and we know this. The architects, the early European architects write about this, how we had these canals, and how they're ancient canals. You see, like this is the part that they don't teach you. They don't teach you that the infrastructure, everything that they built on top of, we had already built stuff. And they always like to tell you that you're a primitive stick person, who couldn't figure out that you built, that you could build houses with rocks and stones. I can tell you this right now. In our territory, if you don't build your house with stones, you freeze to death. So tell me how that works. Tell me how we were all up there and just being like, oh, huddle in the cold without building our houses. It's idiotic. We have a word. We have ancient words for specific houses built out of cobblestone, right? Cobblestone houses. And again, these are techniques that we find all throughout the Americas. The nonsense that they like to teach us is that, oh no, there was no civilization past Mexico City. What? That's what they like to teach you. They're like, oh, Teotihuacan, the Mexico, right? The whole Mexico City thing. Right? Everybody knows about that. The Mayans, the Aztec, the all that. So we didn't have anything up here. So we're all in places where you freeze to death. Where I'm currently living, you get minus 40 degrees weather. That's so cold that your skin will freeze. You die. You die excuse me, your skin freezes in minutes. I should say it that way because that's more accurate. So you're telling me that you had a whole population of people and a heavily abundant population of people, because when we read about Jacques Cartier coming over to Quebec, he said there's so many people, they're swarming him, right? He couldn't count how many people there were. Okay, so you have populations that big, but they're all just huddling out in the cold? Really? That is some Santa Claus level BS right there.
Right.
It's nonsense. They teach us all sorts of nonsense, but but then we send our kids to their schools, which are supposed to be for education, which really they're just for indoctrination. They stupefy us. They make us dumb. And that's another big thing that we got to do, is start taking responsibility for our children's educations, right? That's the biggest thing. Make sure that your kids, do what these Asian people be doing, right? The whole Tiger Mom thing, right? Make sure your kid is being taught by your people, not be taught by these idiot schools and all this. You make sure that you are on your kids' education all day, every day. So I kind of go on rants sometimes.
Oh man, that is cool. Just a couple more things before you leave.
Mm.
The cultures, and I know because you don't sound like you have an accent. You can pick up and live here everywhere because you speak, English like the best of them. What are some of those European holidays like up there compared to here?
In
Christmas, Thanksgiving. What's the story of Thanksgiving there? Because
it's
here,
I'm glad that you brought that one up, because it's always an interesting one. You guys got you guys have Columbus Day, right? This
yeah,
is something
yeah,
that, yeah. So we don't have that, but our Thanksgiving is around that time of year each year. And it's so funny because not too long ago, I've been doing more and more research on these areas. Like, so, okay, so by study, I'm an anthropologist. Okay, that's what I went to university for. That's what I did, and so on and so forth. I didn't really go into that field because they always wanted to push me down into the Africa uh, way of doing things. And I wasn't really. I was interested in Africa, but I didn't want to move out there and do all like that kind of stuff. Anyway, but when it comes to Thanksgiving, there's 5 different Thanksgivings, right? That we historically speaking, at least 5, and 5. There was Thanksgiving used to be celebrated in 5 different ways, because there was similar versions of what was going on in different regions. For us in our territory, we've been doing Thanksgiving from long before the Europeans came here. Thanksgiving ain't got nothing to do with the Europeans. right? It was our great harvest. I mean, think about it. Like, when have you ever known, Europeans to be thankful for anything? Be content with having enough, right? Like, this isn't
Never.
something that they've ever done, right? This was one of our traditions, and it goes back thousands of years. In fact, again, going back to that whole you guys giving us corn thing, right? The three sisters and things, the squash, the beans, that this is something. A lot of these crops were brought into our territory, from the south, right? From our family in the south, from you guys, and so, you know, we are incredibly thankful for these harvests. And we used to have a law. We used to have a law and a rule in our territory that every man was entitled to land, but every man had to work the land. Every man had to create yield. And so, because of this, it created an abundance of food, and an abundance of food that would be reaped at the end of the harvest time. And of course, that comes a little bit earlier for us in the north because snow comes earlier, and therefore you have to reap earlier. And so we would have that large celebration, which today we translate into the English words Thanksgiving. Now, when the Europeans came, they, for the first couple of years anyway, they didn't have any land and they didn't have any food. And so they started starving and cannibalizing each other. It's disgusting. And we took pity on them, and we did share our food with them that first couple of times. It was only in the later on they started. We gave them plots of land, and they started growing their own stuff. But this is what their aspect of that Thanksgiving is all about. They literally were dying of two things: starvation, through and well, three things: starvation, scurvy. Scurvy was the big one in the north, right? And they were freezing to death, and we actually came and helped them. So, but in those five different places, in those five different times that we record Thanksgiving, it went differently in each place, each time. Like the first one, the earliest one that I'm aware of, is the Thanksgiving up in excuse me, it's north of Newfoundland, labor shoot, Labrador. Up there, there's a guy named Forster, and he ends up abducting. They shared food with him, and he ended up abducting this family and bringing them back to England. Right. So each Thanksgiving went a little bit different. Is all I'm getting at. There's many first contacts because they were going up all across the East Coast and having different relations. With us, things went a little bit more amicably. Everything was more settled. But again, this was something that surprised them because they had the worst view of people, of humanity as a whole. Like their view was always negative. They always expected negative stuff from everybody because they treated each other like crap. If we look at Europe at the time they came over here, how they were treating each other. I mean, they had serfdom, right? They had basically slaves that weren't allowed to leave their land over in Europe, and you know, and they would lock up their women in castles and do all sorts of foolishness. That's where you get your chastity belts from. They were doing all sorts of sick things, and then they came over to our lands, and they saw we treated each other with respect. They saw that we fed each other. That no man, they wrote this down so many different times. I've seen this where they write down, amongst the natives there are no hungry, there are no homeless. Of course, there's no hungry, no homeless. Why you treat people like that? These are all my brothers? Why would I treat them like that? But they had no concept. When we talk about civility, who's the savage and who's the civil. There's no contest. They learned all that stuff from us. These guys, let them eat cake. This is their this is their way of looking at things. This is their way of doing the world, where we just leave everybody out in the cold. We leave, we have torture devices and people all sort, that's a job, creating torture devices. Like like what kind of insanity? And they
You know,
spread all this.
you know what's funny? You know
Was that?
what is, you know what's downright hilarious about that?
Mm,
These people came from places that had kings and queens.
mm,
Now we have the audacity to refer to ourselves as such.
yeah.
People who treated their subjects like garbage.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many t-shirts I see that say back Black Queen and Black Queen.
Yeah.
Dude, it's bad. You know what I found funny about Canada? Canada
Right.
is bigger than the United States.
Yeah. Second largest country on the planet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny because they, it's actually a little bit scary because it's, second largest amount of resources with the most land,
Oh
most
man.
resources. So you're like a sitting duck.
Oh
Right?
man. Well, okay, and then just to break it down to our commonalities, where we live in our communities and stuff. What are some of the similarities and differences of so-called Black people from Canada and the United States?
Everything. Is everything. It's like I was. How do I even put that? You. So what I'm always amazed at is how our culture continues to come to fruition when it comes out, right? We got very little that is different. Even the way that we've been treated throughout the years has been very largely the same, right? Like you guys have projects down there, for example, right? Project housing was mimicked up here. We're always copying each other. Our governments are copying each other, and we're copying each other. Oftentimes, like I have a very funny accent in comparison to the rest of my people because I grew up in Toronto, right? So I got some of the down home ways, as we like to call it, and then I got some of the big city ways as well, and then I got the academia crap mixed in. But the way we talk is a lot more similar, okay? And I have to bring it back to this man Pierre Millier, who he lived amongst our people in the olden days. He lived amongst our people in the late 1600s, early 1700s, somewhere around there. And Pierre Millier, he said he said about the way we spoke. He said amongst these people, they naturally derive a rhythm and rhyme in the way that they talk. He said it sounded magical to him, to Pierre. I actually wrote it down somewhere because I thought it was so beautiful. And it's like, isn't that what we do today? When you hear a brother like Nas speak, right? And he's talking, and he has this flow to him, and that goes with all of us. We have this way of recreating our culture because it's in tuned within our veins. Our dances, right? When you talk about the way we dance, right? You guys, the way you dance, this is a natural flow to us, and it's a rhythmic thing. It's part of who we are. It comes internally, right? They talk about hospitality. We've always hear about that Southern hospitality. You got Luda talking about that Southern hospitality that you guys are famous for. We're famous for it too. Again, there are things that are a part of us, that are innate in us, that will never leave us because they can't be taught. They never have been taught. And every time we forget them, We remember them because they come from within, right? That is the thing that I want us to always remember. That's what I want us to remember about ourselves, because you know what? I can, like you said, I can go down south and I'll still be at home because this is our ancestral land. Just like you guys can come up north and you're still at home because this is your ancestral land. We're all one. We always have been one. It's never going to change.
Last question from Gwendolyn. And Gwendolyn asks, do you guys call yourself Black in Canada?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. A lot of us. That I think that's probably more common than even down in the states, because the term African American never sat well with most of us, right? And like, even so, with a generation older than myself, right, a lot of them rejected that term, right? A lot of both terms, both Black and African American. A lot of them, like, they get mad. They definitely get mad at the African, because they would say, and they know and knew back then that they weren't Africans. So the Black, they probably say, okay, well, yeah, our skin is darker than so-called white people, so sure, we'll deal with that a little bit. But you know that's the other thing I have to point out, is that for us it was actually dangerous. Um, I think you guys experienced some of this too with border schools. I think is what you guys call them down there. We had what's called residential schools, and so effectively what the government had done is they set it up that if you when they would come around and do the census, again, we have our own version of that, of what was the demon's name, Plecker, Walter Plecker,
Right.
right? So Plecker did his, the stats thing.
Racial Integrity Act.
There you go. So we have our own version of that, right? And effectively, what happened is when they came around and did the censuses, you had three options. You had Black, you had white, and you had and then you had Indian, right? Sometimes they call it them native, sometimes they call it Indian, but anyway. And if you checked off Indian, then what would happen is soldiers would come around to your house, right, within the year. They'd pick up your children and they would put them in the residential schools. This is by law. The other thing that would happen is that they had what was called Indian hospitals up here. And if you checked off Indian, what they would do is they would come to your house and they'd actually force you to go to the hospital for a checkup. And if they found anything wrong with you, according to them, then you would have to go, and you would stay there, and it was illegal for you to leave the hospital. And so, and this is a part of Canadian history that is, again, undervalued and underappreciated, undertaught. The Indian hospitals. So look that up as well, Canadian Indian hospitals. And what they would do in those hospitals, they weren't actually sick. This is where you guys get your whole situation with the Tuskegee test, right? Remember
Yes.
the whole syphilis thing? Yeah, they were doing this up in Canada since the 1800s. Okay, and this is part of the reason why you got Canada. So Canada is well known for its healthcare, right, and its healthcare system. Okay, the reason is well known for its healthcare and its healthcare system is because they used to test on the Indigenous. They used to test on my ancestors. And so because they're testing on these guys, this is how they made all these scientific advancements, because they had all these people that they're testing out new medicine on. And so when they're testing this new medicine, that's how you get ahead. And they used to when they ran out of people in the hospitals, they started doing it in the residential schools, right? So I forgot how we got onto this, but the point is that, like, we need to really start looking into these things. Now, granted, I still say, yeah, absolutely. I appreciate, the healthcare system as we have it. They, as far as I know, don't continue to do this testing. Who knows what we'll know in 50 years? But, when I go to the hospital, it's fine. It's great. They treat me well. Sure. Okay. This is, as far as I know, something in the past. I wouldn't be surprised to hear about it today, but anyway, this is, I can only tell you what I know at this date and time. But in the past, this is what they used to do throughout the 1800s, early 1900s. They used to test on our people, and as a result of that, they made all these different medical advances and advanced the system. So yes, it's very much built on our backs. And so going back to that, the original question, yes, we started calling ourselves Black in the context of the census, which said that if you were Black, then they would leave you alone, right? I remember, thinking about this and talking to my grandparents about this, well, how even though we were indigenous, we weren't allowed to say that because they were deathly afraid that if we said that we were indigenous, that we would be shipped off to either a residential school or an Indian hospital and never be seen again. So,
I'm sure that happened a lot here, and I'm sure that's why many of us don't have a clue of it today, because the governments of Canada and the United States work hand in hand.
for sure,
They're the same people, which makes them the same government. Curtis, I want to thank you for hanging out with us today, man.
much
I've
appreciated.
learned a lot. I'm sure that the people who've been listening have learned a lot. You got to come back and hang out with us again.
I always appreciate talking to you, brother. I always appreciate it, and like I said, I have to thank you a lot because your work was some of the first stuff I saw on this topic, and because like I said, I always had a general understanding, but that brainwashing that you get from the universities and the school system and from the TV and so on and so forth, had made its way into my mind. And even though, grandma was telling me one thing, I'm just like, well, yeah, but we still look like this, so we have to be from Africa. No, that's that, people. Yeah, I know. I figured, hey, there must be some African down there, and then did the genealogy and said, no, actually, there's 0%, zero, none. Don't see it. So my hats off to you for Mr. Davis, for doing what you do.
And hey, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do.
That's right.
I got it. I got it. We're a part of this land, man. We're a part of our ancestors. Our ancestors are a part of us. We just
Mhm.
have to acknowledge us and do what they say do. Pass it on. Don't let these kids be backward like they did when they first came here. That's all of our job. Mamas and daddies, grandmamas, granddaddies, blah, blah, blah.
Mm,
Because you are them and they are you.
absolutely,
Well,
absolutely.
thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time.
Oh, and actually, I should probably just, if I can, make a shameless plug just very quickly. So if you are interested in seeing any of the stuff that we do, we have lung.ca, LNUG.ca,
Hold up, spell it again.
LNUG,
How do you spell that?
lung, LN,
No, no, no. I'm sorry. How do you pronounce it?
oh, uh,
LNUG?
is lung, yeah, or LNU is how some people pronounce it, but lung, yeah, and also
LNUG.ca.
that's CA, yeah, and yeah, there's I'm sure there's other plugs that I'm forgetting, but it's good talking to everybody. I'm happy to hear us all coming together, and we got to do more coming together. instead of fighting each other. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to get the spell right.
Yeah.
Cool, man.
All right.
Cool, man.
So,
Thanks for hanging out, man. We'll see you next time. You got to
all
come
right.
back.
The Maltese, we'll do. We'll do.
All right, man. Hey, to the audience, thank you guys for hanging out this Sunday afternoon. I know y'all could have been in church praising the Lord, but you came and hung out with us. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time, man. And remember, I told you later on in the week, I'm gonna have some information from the Caribbean. It's gonna knock your socks off. Remember,
Mm.
Caribbean is Americas. Canada is the Americas. You just keep yourself trapped in one state, one county, you just gonna be Eeyore. This whole Americas is yours. Start acting like it later.
Maltese.